My name is Charles Duhigg. I'm the author of The Power of Habit and a reporter at the New York Times, where I'm an investigative business writer. So a habit is a decision that you make at some point that you essentially stop making, but your brain continues acting on. So one of the best examples of this is backing your car out of the driveway. Right? The first time you back your car out of the driveway, it actually takes a lot of concentration. You have to do these complicated things where you look at reflected images and make estimates about the distance between you and your car and the hedges and look into the street and see where traffic might be coming from. But after a couple of weeks of doing this, people get to a place where they can essentially do it on autopilot. They can fiddle with the radio or think about the meeting that's coming up or talk to their kids or remember that you left your kids' lunch on the counter inside. And that's because our brain has this ability to take any repeated behavior and make it into a habit, oftentimes totally unconsciously. If anyone has young children, I have a 5-year-old, you know that it's like a struggle to get them to brush their teeth every morning or every night. That's because they have to make a decision to brush their teeth. Whereas when you think about yourself, none of us have to work hard to brush our teeth. We just do it automatically. That's because it's become a habit. It feels effortless because our brain actually has essentially powered down around that decision. We're no longer making the decision anymore, but we're continuing to act on the behavior. So the reason why habits exist is, and every single animal on Earth has the ability to form habits. In fact, there's a part of their brain, almost every animal has a basal ganglia, which is a part of the brain that is active in forming habits. Without the ability to make habits, evolutionarily, a species will die out. And the reason why is because you need to be able to take the behaviors that happen every day and make them automatic so that you have mental capacity for other activities, right? If you have to decide whether you should eat a rock or an apple every single time you encounter a rock or an apple, you don't have time to invent fire or spears or aircraft carriers or video games. So the key to understanding how to create a habit or change a habit is understanding how a habit functions, which means that you have to understand the structure of a habit. Every habit has 3 parts. There's a cue, which is like a trigger for an automatic behavior to start. And then a routine, which is the behavior itself. And then finally, a reward. And the reward is how your brain learns to remember that habit for the future. And when most people talk about habits, they talk about the behavior, the routine. But what we know is that it's really the cues and the rewards that have a huge impact on how habits exert themselves. And so if you want to create a habit or change a habit, what you need to do is you need to identify the cue and the reward that's going to drive that behavior. A great example of this is that I used to eat a cookie every afternoon. I work at the New York Times. I'd go up to the cafeteria and I'd eat a cookie. And I felt like, I'd put a little note on my monitor that said, no cookies today, and I'd managed to ignore that and go eat a cookie. And so when I was trying to understand how habits work, I would talk to researchers and I'd ask them, what I'd actually say is, I have this friend who has a cookie problem. Can you tell me how to change it? And what they said is, first of all, you have to identify what the cue is. So most cues fall into one of 5 categories. It's usually a time of day or a particular place, certain emotion, the presence of certain people, or a particular behavior that's become kind of ritualized. And so I wrote down those 5 things every day when I had a cookie, and I figured out pretty quickly that the cookie urge always struck between about 3:15 and 3:45 in the afternoon. It was a time of day that was my cue. And then I had to figure out what the reward was. And I thought the reward was cookies, because cookies taste good. But what researchers said is, no. Rewards are much more subtle than that. A cookie is like 12 different rewards in one tasty bundle. You need to experiment. So is the reward that you're hungry and the cookie is satisfying hunger, in which case having an apple should work just as well? Or that you're getting a burst of energy from the sugar, in which case having a coffee should do the trick? What I figured out pretty quickly is that when I went up to the cafeteria to get a cookie, I would see all my friends from work, and I'd sit down and I'd gossip for 15 or 20 minutes. And it was the social experience that was the real reward for me. The cookie was kind of an excuse for that. And so once I identified the cue, the time of day, and the reward, the social experience, I was able to change the habit. And now every day at about 3:15 or 3:20, I stand up and I look for someone who looks like they're at their desk just kind of doing something where I can interrupt them. And I go over and we gossip for 20 minutes. And then I go back to my desk and the cookie urge is gone because I've identified the cue and the routine. I was able to create a new habit by diagnosing these components and then changing the behavior in a way that responds to the old cue and delivers a reward similar to the old behavior. Once an activity becomes a habit, it takes very little willpower, right? That's why we like habits. It's not a struggle to brush your teeth in the morning. You don't have to use up your reservoir of willpower. It's once you get into the habit of eating a salad at lunch, it's not hard to make that decision. But when we're starting the habit, we have to use a little bit of willpower in order to start that new habit forming until it becomes automatic. And the key to understand about that is that willpower is like a muscle, and it will get tired with use. So if you want to create a new habit, you should do it at a time that your willpower muscle is strong. If you want to start exercising, it's probably better to exercise in the morning. Or if you're going to exercise after work, to give yourself in your final hour of work not a huge task that takes a lot of concentration and a lot of willpower. Think of your willpower muscle the same way that you do of your arm strength. If you're going to go lift a heavy box, you give yourself 20 or 30 minutes ahead of time where you're not picking up a bunch of heavy things. One of the things that researchers have discovered is that some habits seem to matter more than others. That they seem to set off, when they start to change, they seem to set off a chain reaction that changes other patterns as well. These are known within the literature as keystone habits. That for some reason, when certain habits start to shift, they affect other patterns almost unconsciously. And a great example of this is that for many people, exercise is a keystone habit. That when they start exercising, they also start eating more healthily, which makes sense because you're eating, you're exercising, you feel better about your body, you start eating better. But when people start exercising habitually, they also on average will start using their credit cards less. They'll do their dishes earlier in the day. What happens is that when you begin to exercise, oftentimes people's self-image starts to change. And that sets off a chain reaction that influences other behaviors in almost unconscious ways. The habits that seem to be keystone habits for particular individuals are things that seem almost irrationally scary. That if you're someone who was a high school athlete and you stopped exercising for a little while and you start running again, that's probably not going to be a keystone habit for you. Because you know how to exercise. Your self-image incorporates you as someone who's in good shape. But if you're someone who, like me, never exercised, who went through the first 20 years of your life not really doing anything physical, exercise is scary. The concept of getting up, you don't even know what to wear, and you're going to look like an idiot, and you don't know which route to take. That seems like a scary concept. And so when you start to exercise, when I start to exercise habitually, it changes my self-image of myself in ways that I don't even realize. That means that it's a keystone habit.